Welcome students to lesson 4 of the Living World topic. In this lesson we're going to be striking a more hopeful tone. I'm going to be showing you how we can restore ecosystems that have been damaged by sudden change. Please write the date, title and learning objective and have a pen and paper ready to learn. Okay, time to review prior learning. Write 1 to 10, answer the questions from memory and then mark your answers. Game time. Number 1. An ecosystem is the community of living organisms and their non-living environment. 2. A decomposer breaks down dead organic matter and returns nutrients to the soil. 3. A primary consumer gets its food from producers, for example cows from grass. 4. A keystone species has great importance in an ecosystem. Losing it reduces biodiversity. 5. Eutrophication is the process in which algae bloom in a water body, killing plants, which reduces the oxygen in water. 6. An invasive species is one that is not naturally a part of an ecosystem and damages the natural balance within it. 7. The nutrient cycle describes how energy moves through a food web, from soil or water to producers to consumers and back. 8. Shell pays about $1 billion in taxes every year to the Nigerian government. 9. Kia and Volkswagen are car companies that have invested in manufacturing in Nigeria. 10. The multiplier effect describes how one economic activity leads to many others. Give yourselves a mark out of 10. If you got 8 or above, excellent work. Write any questions that you got wrong and their answers and then test yourselves on them repeatedly until you know them. Fantastic. To introduce this lesson, I'm going to show you a picture of a project that's being done in South Africa, a country at the very south of the continent of Africa. And it's all to do with helping to restore an ecosystem and its biodiversity. Please look at the photo and answer the questions next to it, using the understanding that you already have. Go for it. Okay, number 1. What word means planting trees in an area without them? It's afforestation. 2. How could tree planting increase biodiversity in an ecosystem? You should have said that trees are producers, and as a result they could provide habitat for other living organisms and they could also provide food for consumers, thereby allowing biodiversity to increase because there's more food and more habitat for different species. 3. What are the challenges to tree planting projects? Why are they not possible everywhere? So if tree planting is so effective for restoring ecosystems, why don't we just do it everywhere? Well, one problem is space. Humans need a lot of space for agriculture and for urban areas, cities, and for living. As a result, trees can't be planted in great numbers everywhere. 4. Can any species of tree be planted anywhere in the world? And why? You should have said that the answer to that question is no, and here's why. It's because the climates and the environments in different places around the world are different, so that some tree species will not survive in environments to which they are not adapted. So you can't plant the same type of tree in any place in the world to restore an ecosystem. Okay, in this lesson I'm going to show you 3 stories about projects around the world that help you to understand how ecosystems can be restored from having been damaged. Okay, write the subtitle and underline it. First way ecosystems can be restored. Simply stopping the human activity that has been affecting it. Sometimes humans are operating in an ecosystem that is damaging its biodiversity. If you stop, this can help. So how do we do that? I'm going to take you in your mind to Costa Rica, a NEE in Central America, which is part of the continent of North America. It's one of the most developed countries in the world in many ways. People have high quality of life, high education, good healthcare. But they have in the past struggled with ecosystem damage. So how have they stopped this? Well, they've created something called national parks all around the country. Parque Nacional is the Spanish for national park. And one of the famous ones, Manuel Antonio National Park, is an important example of this. A national park is an area of natural land, so a natural ecosystem, that is protected from human activity. The primary sector cannot enter a national park. You can't mine there, you can't farm there. You can't make money from a national park from logging, chopping down trees. In creating national parks, like this, Manuel Antonio National Park, you can protect and restore the ecosystem, and that's exactly what's happened. This national park has been turned into tourist attraction, where these raised platforms have been placed around the forest so people can explore and become educated about the ecosystem, but no longer damage it. As a result of the national park status of this area of Costa Rica called Manuel Antonio, the biodiversity in this area has increased, and now sloths and other mammals have increased in number, and also there are many hundreds of species of birds like this toucan in Manuel Antonio National Park. Additionally, ecotourism has increased. That's me on a trip to Manuel Antonio National Park. The money from tourism has been used to help strengthen this national park, for example, to build tourist attractions and to build these bridges and to pay law enforcement so that they can protect the national park from human activity. So the first way that you can restore an ecosystem, like in Costa Rica, is to create national parks. Second way. Last lesson I told you about keystone species and how important they are to an ecosystem's health. Sometimes a keystone species is removed by human activity and it creates great damage. In the early 1900s, sea otters were killed for their fur and their meat by people. This wiped out the kelp forests in the ocean off the California coast, as I showed you that example last lesson. They've now since been returned, which has improved the health of the ecosystem by allowing the kelp to grow, because the sea otters eat the sea urchins. The example I'm going to show you today is about a particular keystone species that exists in a place called the Yellowstone National Park in the central area of the United States of America. And the keystone species is the wolf. And here's why it's so important. Yellowstone National Park is an area of great biodiversity. These are just a few of the animals and plants that live there. And from this diagram, you should be able to see how important the wolf is. The wolf eats a lot of the large mammals in the ecosystem, the elk and the mule deer. This helps to reduce the amount that they feed off of the producers, which increases the habitat for many thousands of species of organisms, of primary producers and consumers. Not only that, the wolf also kills coyotes, a smaller type of predator, which hunts mice and beavers. The wolf hunts them much less. Because there are fewer coyotes, there are more mice and beavers, which means that the rough-legged hawk and other birds of prey have more food, so the population of them increases as well. Beavers eat far fewer producers than do these animals, and so having more beavers is not so harmful to the producers. Therefore, the wolf dramatically increases biodiversity by reducing the amount of these consumers that are eaten and making sure that the producers are healthy and great in number. In the early 20th century, wolves were killed in great numbers by people as humans started to move into the area to live. The loss of the wolves meant the rise of these large mammals. And this led to significant overgrazing, too much eating of the grasses and the primary producers. As a result, all the consumers above the producers died out in population because there wasn't enough food or habitat anymore. All because the wolf left the ecosystem. So, what did they do? Well, the story's in the USA, in Yellowstone National Park, which is about here in the USA. This is what the area looked like before. The main rivers that coursed their way through the ecosystem had barren land all around them, where the large mammals like the elk and the moose had eaten all the grasses. Because of this, there was much less habitat for other animals to live, so they all moved away or died out. The biodiversity in this ecosystem decreased, simply because the wolf was gone. So, as you might imagine, a breeding program was run, which is where wolves were bred and raised and then reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park. Within just a few years, a dramatic effect on the ecosystem was found because of the arrival of the wolves. Suddenly the rivers looked like this. The trees were growing strong all around the rivers. But wolves don't eat trees, so how did this happen? Well, the wolves either ate or scared away the large mammals from the river areas. As a result, the producers sprung back to life and trees grew all around the rivers again. This is the aspen tree, very important tree. The roots of the trees held all the soil together, which meant the river cut a straighter course through the ecosystem, but also the trees provided habitats for many different species of birds and other animals. All because of the reintroduction of this keystone species, the wolf, biodiversity increased. I encourage you to watch this video to understand this story even better. Finally, afforestation, as we introduced at the beginning of the lesson. In 2010, South Africa hosted the Football World Cup, and one of the ways that it won the competition to host the World Cup was by proving that it was going to improve its natural environment, its ecosystems, and it did that through afforestation. A large landfill near a city called Durban in southeast South Africa, about here, which was smelling badly and making the lives of the locals living near it very unpleasant, was restored through afforestation. This is called the Buffelsdry Land Restoration Project. And here's what happened. The local people, who are quite poor in this area of South Africa, were told, if you grow and plant lots of trees over the top of this landfill, we will give you free food in exchange in the form of oats and other healthy foods. And this really helped the people, so they had a reason to do so. Within a few months, thousands of trees were planted of many different species over this landfill. And as a result, just a few years later, it's a completely different environment. Many different species of tree have grown up and matured here, and it's been shown that more than 20 species of birds have arrived, and the biodiversity of the ecosystem has increased simply because of the arrival of trees through this afforestation project. Make sure you watch this video before you end the lesson. Okay, time to assess your learning. Get a whiteboard out or a pen and paper and answer these questions. Question 1. Why is a keystone species so important for an ecosystem? So you should have put, a keystone species helps maintain the biodiversity of an ecosystem because they balance the populations of many different species, therefore preventing the dominance of any one species. For example, the sea urchin in the coast because of the sea otter, or the large mammals in the Yellowstone National Park because of the wolf. Number 2. Why is sudden ecosystem change a problem for biodiversity? You should have put that sudden ecosystem change is a problem because ecosystems take many years to develop the balance in populations between the species. Additionally, it takes many hundreds of years for species to adapt to each other so that they can all survive. Sudden change takes away this balance, for example through invasive species, and it also dramatically decreases biodiversity because, for example, if producers are removed, then all the other species are affected. And finally, consider how the nutrient cycle in South Africa was affected by afforestation. What changes happened because of afforestation to the nutrient cycle? Okay, this is a more difficult question, but you may have said that the trees meant that more nutrients in the soil were being absorbed and going into providing food and habitat. This led to an increased biomass of consumers and an increased activity of decomposers because the consumers were dying and the leaves of the trees were falling, lead to an increased amount of litter on the ground. Okay, Time to embed your learning. I'm going to show you some questions, answer them using your understanding, and then mark your answers. Go for it. Make sure you use the keywords. So number 1. You should have put, grey wolf controlled the population of large mammals, mark. Removing it led to large rise in mammal populations, which overgrazed. Make sure you have that keyword. Loss of plants reduced populations of insects and other small mammals, as well as birds, a mark. Loss of trees also meant bears left the area, a mark. Wolves also controlled small predator populations, for example coyotes. And no wolf meant coyote populations rose, killing smaller mammals. So any 3 of these. Watch the video if you didn't understand this fully. Number 2. Why human-induced ecosystem change is often more damaging than natural changes. So change caused by people. Why is it worse than natural changes? Make sure you use these keywords. All 3 points here needed. Make sure you have the keywords that are underlined. 3. Outline how afforestation can restore ecosystem biodiversity. Afforestation means planting trees, so try and define the terms at the beginning. So say what afforestation means to show you understand it. Increases food, consumers. More food for high levels of the food web, good keyword to use. Creates habitats. Give yourselves a mark out of 9, and make sure, really important, that you add any corrections in green. Okay, from memory, write 2 questions from the lesson, answer them, and then test yourselves repeatedly on them. Thank you so much for joining me in this lesson. I hope you've learned a lot. In the next 2 lessons, we are going to be focusing on a large version of an ecosystem, the biggest category of ecosystems that cover the whole world, and they are called biomes. Can't wait for you to join me then.